Okay, so welcome to today's class. I think we can carry on from where we left off last time. I will share my screen. I don't know if you're able to view it. Are you able to see my screen? Oscar? Okay, I think we can get straight to that. Now, what we're going to do, I just have a brief recap of what we had covered last time. We had looked at stored procedures, what they are, the advantages, why we create them, how to create them, and how to execute them. I think we did the whole 9 yard, including a sample of a crowd operation of how we would actually could be able to create. I think we created a user, something of the sort, right? Sorry about my coarse voice. Looks like I'm having a sort of, but nothing that is not manageable. So basically, that's what we did last time when we were looking at stored procedures. Now, we have seen that the database can be able to work on its own, but we also need to be able to access the stored procedures from our application, which means we want to create what we call RESTful APIs. We want to create an API with endpoints that we can now be able to use to be able to link with our application. And that's now what is going to be our focus for today. Let me admit this, let commas. Okay, so our purpose for today is basically showing us how to create APIs and how we can be able to invoke or call those API endpoints in order to be able to make them useful to our application. That is going to be our agenda for today. Now, this is not in any way going to be restricted to what I'm going to demonstrate because I want to use PHP. Reason why I'm picking PHP is because it's the most popular programming language as far as the internet is concerned right now. So I'll pick it on account of that. But if you decide to use something else like Ruby or ASP.NET or even Node.js, or you want to use Django for Python, it doesn't really matter. What's important is the principle. So in my case, I'm going to use PHP because it's the most popular programming language over the internet with about 80% of the market share. So it naturally makes sense for me to show you how to use PHP. But if you decide to use something else, then that now becomes uh, uh, something your preference, so to speak. So if your preference is not JS, fine. If your preference is Ruby on Rails, fine. If your preference is something like ASP.NET, that's also fine. If it's Django, that's fine. So it will depend on actually how you want to use it. Now, when it comes to PHP, I'm going to use what we call vanilla PHP. I'm not going to use any library like um, like Cake PHP or Laravel or something of the sort. I'm going to use vanilla PHP for this. So again, in future, if you feel that you want to use, sorry, if you feel that you want to use PHP with Laravel, that's also fine. But I am going to focus on vanilla PHP, which means PHP out of the box as it is. So we're going to manage everything on our own. Now, I'm going to use architecture called MVC or Model View Controller, where we're going to separate our functionality that access the database inside models. So it's only the models that have access to the database, which makes application secure and very, very easy to share. So we'll use MVC. So let me just open Notepad here. So I'm going to use M. I'm going to use M for model. Then we're going to have views for the web pages. Then you're going to have the controllers, which now acts as a bridge between the model and the view. So MVC. So this is the architecture that we will use when it comes to this API development. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to design our folder structure so that now it mimics the MVC structure, and then we can now be able to start using that folder structure to create our API endpoints and see how we can be able to test those endpoints if they are working properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my uh, uh, Explorer. I'm going to go to my Drive C. I'm going to go to XAMPP, then htdocs, because this is where all our websites are placed. Then inside htdocs here, I'm going to create a new folder, and I will call it address book, like that. So this is our address book. Then inside our address book, I'm going to create various folders. Well, I can leave it open like that. Then I can create the folders from Visual Studio Code. I think that would be a better way to do it, though naturally I will create them directly before I go to Visual Studio Code. So again, once I open Visual Studio Code, you can close this and open Visual Studio Code. This is going to be my code editor for this practice. But of course, you can use other editor. We are not concerned about the development environment. You pick what works for you. But I think Visual Studio Code is one of the best code editors we have at the moment. So I'll pick Visual Studio Code over here. Then once it opens, I'll tell it I want to open a new folder. Open folder. So after you get the folder, just say open folder. Then open your address book folder by double clicking on it. Then say select folder. It would be able to open your address book folder over here, and you can see it's very empty. So what I could do is Control plus plus to make the fonts bigger, slightly bigger for your view. I think that's much. Okay, that's well, I don't know if that's too big, but I think this is more readable. So from here, I can create the folders that I want. I have a folder for models. This is where all my database elements are going to go. I'll have a folder for views. I'll also have a folder for controllers. So this is MVC. So all my models are going to go inside here. Now inside the models, I will have one model that connects to the database directly. So there's only one thing that's going to be connecting to our database. So I'll come here and I'll create a file here, and I'll say this is database.php, or I can just call it database.php. So you can call it database.php like that. So this is the only file that will connect to your database. Nothing else connects to your database. Now, this is going to be a very important file. Since we're going to use object-oriented programming, I'm going to start PHP. PHP is usually started with that. Then I'll close it like that. So everything that is PHP is going to go inside here. Now, again, the thing I'm going to do is that every programming language is every concern in our application is going to be written in its own file. So PHP will be separate, HTML will be separate, JavaScript will be separate, CSS will be separate, SQL is already separate because they are inside stored procedures within our database. So we're not going to mix and match things. We're going to try and separate concerns as much as possible. Now, for the database class, what I will do is, because you're going to use a PHP to manage sessions, so I'm going to say session start. Session will be able to allow me to be able to check who was logged in, whether they have a PHP session and all that, because that would now be able to tell me whether either is logged in or not. Remember, most of the time we're using HTTP, which is a sessionless protocol, so it doesn't know whether it has connected or not. So when you use a session on the database side, we usually pass that session over to the application. Then the application sends over the session back to the server, so we are able to know that we are actually connected based on that particular session. So I will start a session before I do anything else. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class which will allow me to be able to connect to my database. So I'll say here, create a new class called database. You can call it database, you can call it DB, it doesn't really matter, like that. So we have this class called database. Now this class will have methods, and this, before even methods, it have properties. The properties are things that will help us to be able to connect to the database, like username, password, driver, and the likes. So what I'll do is I'll first of all define the properties that I need to use. I'll begin with the server name. So I'll make them private because as you know, we want them only accessible within this database. So I'll have the host there like that. Then I can have the username, which is there. I can also have the password, which is blank. And of course, the database is there. But in this particular case, I'll open SQL log. I'm not sure what we called our database, but I need to find out what name we gave to it. So I'll just bring this this edge here, and this one on this other edge here. I'll close the chat window. So I can come to address book. Actually, it's just called address book. So I'll simply say here, address book. That's our database. So with those ones in place, maybe the other thing I can do is just a character set, which is UTF car sets, which is UTF-8 and before, because that's what you use inside this database, if you remember. So if I come to properties of this database, properties should be somewhere here. Alter. You can see it's UTF-8 and before. So that's the character set that the database is using. So I'll also put that over here just to make sure that we are on the same page. So that's how we are able to connect to, those are the properties we need to be able to connect to our database. The other thing I need to do is to create a method that does the actual connection. So I'll create three methods, one for connecting, one for saving data, and one for extracting data. So I'll begin with the connection. I'll say public function. By the way, I don't need to have public. By default, they will be public. So I can say just function connect. And this connect does not take any properties. It just tries to connect to the database based on the properties that are listed above here. And if not, then it's able to, I'll just close that. I'll make this big. So if it's able to connect, fine. If it's not able to connect, then it will give me an error. So the first thing I need to do is I'll try running some commands over here. So this command, I will define uh, two things. One, of course, is the PDO. The other one is the data source name. So since I already written this one, I just let it be so that now I just explain what happens. Now, DSN here is the data source name. So in the data source name, I need to give the driver, which is MySQL, the host, which is this variable over here, which is localhost. I need to give the name, the database a name, which is this name over here. I also need to give the character set, which is this character set that has given here. So that becomes my data source name. Then I create PDO. PDO means PHP database object, which is basically what allows me to be able to interact with the database and be able to extract data from it without necessarily rewriting my application. So if I chose to use Oracle in future, I'll only change this data source name. If I decide to use SQL Server, I'll only change the data source name, specifically the drivers. That's what I will change mostly, the drivers. If I wanted to use Postgres, I'll only change the DSN. So that's why I'm trying to make it as universal as possible. So the DSN will be able to allow me to determine the drivers, the database name, and the character set being used. Then, of course, PDO now will allow me to use the connection. And of course, with username and password provided, then now it is able to return that database object that the connection was successful. So that's ideally what this connect function is going to do. The only other thing I've done here is to create set an attribute mode to error exception. So it basically means that if there is any error, it will be able to give me that error. Now, once I try this, when I try to connect and it fails, I am going to capture the exception down here, as you can see. Sorry. So here I'll have this catch. It's only remembering that because I've already typed it before. Otherwise, I would have typed it in full. So probably I'll just bring this back like that, okay? So probably what we'll do is that it will catch this error. Someone will say something. It will catch this PDO exception as this error. Then I'll simply echo it has failed, and I'll get the message from that particular error. So this in itself will allow me to be able to connect to the database. After I connect to the database, the next thing I need to do is probably maybe I just put comments here. Connect to database and return successful connection. successful connection. So if everything goes according to plan, you should get a successful connection. Otherwise, if it fails, it will just give us a message. So if it gives us a successful connection, then we'll be good to go. The next will be uh, executing, execute query and return results if you need to. So to execute query, I'm going to use a function called getData. So I'll put here a function called getData. It will require you to pass an SQL query, and then it will be able to, sorry, get data. It will pass, you'll pass an SQL query. Then the only thing you're going to do is to create a connection. After creating a connection, then you just pass the query. And I'll just do it in one statement. I'll simply say something like this: return that. So when I say this dot connect, it's going to execute this method because this refers to the current class, which is database. So this dot connect will execute this, and if everything is okay, to return this PDO. Once the PDO is returned, then I'll say query that PDO based on the SQL statement that has been passed. Then whatever comes as the result, pass it over to the calling function. So that would be able to execute the query for me. So here I'm going to return data from query as JSON object. So I'm going to return data that comes from the execution as a JSON object because we are going to be using our base application, and of course APIs usually accept JSON return. So most APIs would expect a JSON return. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a function called getJSON. I'm still going to give an SQL query, and inside this, I'm just going to now execute my query, then of course return JSON object. So I'll declare here a variable called record set, and I'll simply say this record set will be get data. So get data, basically it will come and execute this. When you say execute this, it will come and connect to the database. Then once the connection is successful, it will query the database, then it will give me the results back. Now, once it gives me the results back, the only thing I need to do is to now be able to return the results as a JSON encoded object, which means I'll take the results that have been stored there, then I will fetch all the data. This is the default behavior, which is returning an associative array, but sometimes I just like being a little bit too specific so that now it doesn't return something like a class object or something like that. So I'll just be very specific, return an associative array. That is the default, but I just like doing it again just to make sure that everything works according to plan. Now, this is the class that's going to form the basis of how we're going to connect to our database, how we're going to execute queries, and how we're going to return results. So there's connecting to the database, executing an SQL statement, then returning that data as JSON object if I need to. So these are basically the things that we're going to be doing over and over and over again inside the database. Hence, I've decided to write them as a class with its method. I think we've done object-oriented programming. You know what a class is, you know what property is, you know what a method is, and of course, you know what inheritance is. So I'm just trying to put all these things in one simple implementation just to show you exactly how everything works. So this database class is going to be one of the most important classes that you're going to be dealing with. But virtually all the models that you're going to have will inherit from the database because this will enable them to have connection, execute an SQL statement against your database, and also return data whenever you need it. So this is more like our one of our master classes that you're going to be able to implement across all the other classes that you're going to have. Now, we're done with this particular class. I had some people are trying to come in. Okay, there are none, which is okay. So since we have already created this class, let's create another class that now allows us to manage the users. So for the users, we're going to say, going to come to models here, right click, say new file, and you say users or user.php. User.php. Now for user.php again, we simply start PHP like that. Now the first thing we're going to do is, because everything must inherit from the database class, we will require that file first. So simply say require once. Then they're in the same folder, database.php and user.php are in the same folder. So I'll simply say that. So require once database.php. So it means it's going to take everything that is inside here and more like copy it up here. That's basically what it means. Then now I can create my class for managing the users. So I'll simply say I have a class here called user, and this user extends the database. That in itself means that user is going to pick all the properties and methods of the database class. So I don't need to repeat connect, execute query, give results, and all that. It already knows how to do that from the database part. That's actually what inheritance is all about. It will inherit all those properties and methods as far as the database class is concerned. But for the user, we need to do very specific things. We need to check if the user exists. So check if user exists in the database. Then the next thing, we'll need to save a user. The next thing, we'll need to get list of users. The next thing, we'll get users details. Then we might also need to change the user's password. Change user's password. We might also need to log in the user, and so on and so on. So technically, when it comes to managing the user, there are several things that you can do as far as that user is concerned. This is just an example of what we will need to do. So we need to be able to see how we can actually create an API endpoint that is able to now allow us to be able to access all this functionality as far as a user is concerned. So to check a user, you remember we wrote a query. You remember I wrote a query for checking a user. So if I come to my database, I close the SQL lab. I probably think I need to make it a little bit open. So I'll have it there and have it this on this other side. I'll have them side by side. Then I'll have this. I'll have stored procedure. I have users. So check user is here. So when I say check user, you can see these are the parameters it requires. User ID, check field, and check value. So I can just copy this and come here and say SQL is equals, then I'll simply say call, then I'll paste that query over there. Of course, I'll need to remove these data types here, like that. And of course, if these fields are going to be string, of course, I can come here and declare SQL equals blank by default, because this file is copied here. So this variable will always be there. I think that is a nice place to put it, because we're going to use it in multiple places. Now, because this is a number, I just enclose it in braces. Because this is a string, I'll enclose it inside a single quote, then curly braces. This is also string, I'll close it into a single quote, then curly braces. So it means here, when I'm saying, of course, I need to create a function. Sorry, I need to create a function. Check user. Of course, it has those three fields like that. Then this one is already up there, so that's fine. So that's how it should have been. So a function called check user. So if this exists, I'll simply say get data, then I'll say row count. Row count will count if there are any rows. If there are any rows, then it will return true. If there are no rows, it will return false. Or in short, it will return how many rows actually exist. So if the row that exists is more than one, then that user exists. Otherwise, if the row that exists is zero, then that user does not exist. So that is actually how we're going to check the user. Now, to save the user, we'll create here a function called save user. For now, I'll leave out the fields that I need. I'll probably deal with them later. Then here, I'll put SQL is equals, and I'll call. So I'll come here and I'll say save user. I'll say alter. Then I'll pick save user here with all its properties like that. So I'll paste it inside here. Of course, what I could do is just to remove these extra spaces, remove data types, leave the commas, but remove the data types. I can simply say Control D to select the data types that are the same and press delete. I can press here again, Control D, press delete, and added by also, well, I'll probably put it like that. So I was expecting this closing bracket should be here. So for this, I'll say user ID is a number, so that username is text, so I'll enclose it inside brackets. I mean, inside the single quotation marks. First name, same thing. I want to think also last name will be the same thing. Mobile, yeah, the rest are okay. So added by is okay. Salt is that. Password, email, mobile should be also text like that. So I think, yeah, I think that should be okay. Now for this added by, okay, I think that's fine. Sorry. Why is it not okay? I don't know why it's giving me a headache. Well, I'll just save this. So once I'm done with that, I'll simply come here and say, hey, what is the tab doing on my computer? Okay. So I'll simply say this get data. Get data is going to save the data. Then I'll simply say return. I'll return a JSON object and say status is success and message is user was saved successfully. So I'm just going to return this because if there's any error, then it's going to be trapped here. If there's any error, it's going to be trapped down here. If there's no error, then usually it will return this particular object. So that is how we actually save the user. Now, how do you get, of course, to save the user, I'll need user ID. So I'll need to provide these variables. I'll need user ID. I can see it as filled in for me, password, salt, and added by. Well, we could do that. That's fine. Now, then the other thing is actually now getting a list of users. So say function get users. So get users will not require any parameters, I think. If I come here and I say get all users, alter, you can see it does not require any parameters. So I just execute it as is. So I'll simply say here SQL is equals to actually it should be this call. Then, of course, because this is data that I'm going to be returning, what I'll do is, and all PHP statements, by then make sure there's a semicolon at the end. So once I get that, I'll simply say return this. Now I'm going to use get JSON. Then I'll pass the scale statement. This get JSON method we wrote here, this one. So it will just return that data as a JSON object on the front end. And that's basically it. So you can see my structure is becoming very, very simple in terms of how I'm sending data over to the server and exporting data from the server. If you wanted to get users detail, we're going to write a function here, function get user details. And here I'll need the user ID, whose details I need, like that. So get user detail here, I'll come and say get specific user, because that requires a user ID, as you can see. And I'll say here SQL is equals call. Then I'll do that. Of course, I'll remove this data type, and I will enclose this inside curly braces, and I'll put a semicolon at the end here. Then here, I'll just return again, because this is data that I'm returning. I'll say this dot get JSON. Now to change a user's password, I'll write a function here, function change user password. I'll need the user ID and new password, and I also need the source. So I can just set password here, or you can use new password, not a big deal. Then here, of course, I'll put an SQL statement, and I will say call, and I'll come here and I'll say change password. It's here, alter. I'll copy it as it is. Like that. Then I'll remove these data types. I'll remove this one also. I'll remove this one also. And this one also. Like that. Then, of course, once I do that, I'll now give them the data types they need. This one is supposed to be integer. These other ones are going to be string. This password, I can remove this. It's new password, that's the name of the variable. New password, then this password is actually a string. So I'll put string, then curly braces. Then for the sort, the same thing. I'll put string, then curly braces. Then change by is going to be an ID. So I'll just put the curly braces there. Then of course I'll put a semicolon. That should allow me to change the password. Of course, change the password. I'll simply say get data. Then I'll just return the status. Get data is for storing. Get JSON is for returning. So I hope you get the idea. And whenever I say get data, it means I'm just want to execute something against the database, as you can see here. Return, connect, then run the query. So if you just run the query, won't really give me the results. But when I say get JSON, then that would mean execute the query, first of all, then return any records that are actually from that particular query. So that's very, very important for us to understand how that works out. So that should be able to allow us to be able to um, um, to change the user's password. But to log in the user, we can say function log in user. I only need the username and the password. So to log in a user, that's all I need, like that. But then now the problem is I didn't write a stored procedure here for login user. But what I can do is I can create a stored procedure here, and I'll simply say sp get user details by username, like that. So again, just like we are doing this other time, I'll remove this. I'll probably make it bigger so it's easier to read, like that. So I'll remove these ones also. So here I just need the username, which is variable character, maybe 100. I don't expect a user's name to be more than 100 characters. Then here I'll simply say select all fields from this table called users. Double click that, where I'll remove that. and I'll pick this field called username is equals to the username that was provided, like that. So I'll run this. It is there. Then I'll just execute this against the database. This. This. I'll copy it. And now I'll simply come here and say SQL is equals call. I run that function. I'll remove these characters. Then, of course, this is a string, so I'll enclose it like that and put a semicolon here. So that is how that's going to work out. Now, when it comes to logging in a user, it's usually not a very straightforward thing because we will sort the password when you're saving it, and of course also uh, encrypt it. So what you're going to do is just do the reverse. So I will do the reverse of what I will do when I'm saving the user, which I'm going to show us on the controller side. So here, I'll simply say my record set will be this get data. And then, of course, I'll simply say fetch that data. And I had written this before. That's why you can see it's trying to fill it in for me. So once I fetch the data, I'll check if there is any records on RST. Then the hash password will be, I'll get a hash. This is the algorithm I'm going to use, SHA-56. I'm going to check the password that you have provided with the sort that comes from the database. So I'll include them, that becomes the hash password. So I'll just compare if the hash password is the same as the password is in the database field. Then I'll return it is successful. Otherwise, here I'll return that the credentials are invalid, because if the password is not correct, then the credentials are invalid. If the user does not exist also, then the credentials are also invalid. So I can use an else here just to make it a little bit more readable for you, like that. So in a nutshell, we are going to call the stop procedure. We're going to get all the data. By the way, you can either use it like this, or I can get JSON and decode this data back as a record set, something like this. So I could have also said RST is equals to this get JSON, because get JSON will already get me the data for this SQL statement. But then what I'll do here is JSON decode, and then I make sure that it returns an associative array. So I could have written it this way instead of writing it this way. So either would be able to work fine. It just depends on really what your preference is, because this will still get the data, then it will fetch the associative array. This function, get JSON, will get the data as already an encoded JSON object. So I'm just decoding it back to a regular associative array. So that's basically it. So whichever preference you choose, that should be able to work out. So here, once you get the data, just check if the data has anything. If data has anything, then check if you hash the password that the person has provided with the salt in the database. Then if the hash password is the same as the password in the database, then you return this success. Otherwise, if it is not successful, then it will always be invalid credentials. So whether the user does not exist, or whether the password is wrong, it will always return invalid credentials. So that's how we log in the user. I know that's quite a mouthful when it comes to the object, but basically what we're trying to do is, this is just the CRUD operations that we did on our database in order to allow us to be able to create a user, change a user's password, get a user, and all that kind of stuff. So the only thing important here is to delete a user, but all the other operations as far as users are concerned are now in. Let's see how this is going to be able to work out. I can see some people are, okay, don't know why you don't want to come to classes late, but that's fine. So we have done that. Now the only thing we have done, the model, which is the database, we've also done a model for the user, which inherits from the database. And now we have created the specific functionality as far as the user is concerned. You can check a user, you can save a user, you can get a user, you can get user's details, you can change user's password, you can also log in a user. Now, the most important thing about saving a user is that even before you decide to save a user, you might want to check if the user exists. So I'll just crash this a bit, and I'll simply say check if user exists. Check if user exists. I don't know why my mic is shouting low battery. Well, I can see the battery is okay. I don't know why it's shouting the battery is low, but that's fine. All right, so let's check if the user exists before we save. So before we save a user, we need to check if they exist. And how are we checking if the user exists? We were checking check user, check, it's actually here. But then if you look at it, we can check by how many fields. So check user, there's username, mobile, and email. So let's first of all start checking by username, the username you provided. So we'll start by with username. So we'll simply say if check user, user ID, username, and username, then we'll return username already exists. Then again we'll say else if. Now we'll check your email. It's only doing this because I've already done this a couple of times before. So that's why it's not giving me a very difficult time. So we'll run this, you'll need to add this because it's a method inside this function. So I'll say if this the check user, I'll give the user ID that you provided, the username, and the username that you've provided. So if this one returns more than 0, then it means that the record exists. So we're going to basically execute this. Same way, we're going to check if here I need to check this like that. So here we're going to check start with username. We're going to start with the username. After username, we're going to come to so we start with username, then we check the password, we check email, then of course we check if mobile number exists. So that's basically it. So I can put this one inside here for consistency's sake. Yeah, something like that. So again, before we save the user, we'll simply check if the user exists. If they don't exist, then we can save and return the status of saving of the records, whether it was successful or not. So I think that's basically everything we need as far as the call is concerned. What is this all about? Yeah. So basically, that's it, and that should allow us to be able to save a user. Now we have created models, so the only thing we need to create is now the controllers. So once the models have been put, so you put models for all your entities, users, categories, businesses, towns, and basically everything will be done in this particular manner. So you create a class for that particular entity. It extends the database. It must extend the database because the database is the one that has access to your database and it's able to execute query and give you results back. Otherwise, you would need to repeat this code for each and every model that you're using if you don't extend the database class into your current object. Then now write the specific functions the for specific operations for your entity. Like I can have check user. This can check any of the three fields. So you can see, yes, I'm going to execute this function, but I can check these three fields separately by just calling this one function, and this is the function that actually connects to the database, gives you the user ID, checks which field is being checked and which value is being checked, then of course tells you whether it exists or not. If it does not exist, then it saves. Then you have getting all the users, we have getting a specific user's details, we have changing a user's password, and we have logging in a user. So generally, these are the current operations that will happen on the user's model. But again, a model is just like a template. It's just like when you want to bake a cake, you have that template where you put your ingredients. So the template is just something that is designed to give you the shape and form of how the cake would look like. But the ingredients will now give you the actual piece of cake. And that's where now the controllers come in, because this model will just sit there and do nothing. It's a template for user operations. But now in the models, we're going to instantiate an object based on the user. Then that object is what you're going to manipulate based on these functionalities that you're seeing over here. So that's very, very important for us to understand the difference between a model and an object. A model is not an object. A model is like a template. It just sits there and it knows what it's supposed to do, but really does not do anything with it. An object, on the other hand, is an instantiation of a model where now we have an actual real-life object that can now invoke the methods of its template. So if you tell it to check a user, it will check. If you tell it to save a user, it will save it. If you tell it to log in a user, it logs in a user, and so forth and so forth. Hence, now where the controllers are coming in. So inside the controller here, I'll create a file and I'll call it user operations, user operations, user operations.php, like that. So this user operations.php is where we're actually going to create the actual object and manipulate it. So of course, first of all, we jump, then we close PHP. I don't know why my mic is telling me that it's running low. Yeah, it's actually low. I don't know what happened, has happened with them. I'm changing that one, so let's just continue. Now here, what you're going to do is we will, first of all, include this file called users. You can see users is in a folder called models. This one is in controllers. So it means I will require once. I'll not require database, but this time I will jump up one folder and we'll go to models, then I'll go to user.php. So this means jump up one folder. So I jump from outside controllers, so I'll be inside address book. So inside address book, look for a folder called models here. Then inside models, take user.php, which is here. So now I have that file connected correctly. Then here, I will create a new variable and I'll call it user, which will be a new instance of user. So it will be a new instance of this user, which we have defined here. So now it is able to do everything that is down here. So here, we're just going to check what the user is trying to do. So check what the request is. So what we'll do is, first of all, we'll check if you are saving a user. So we'll say if is set, and I'll say post, then we say save user, like that. Then we have this. If somebody says save user, so we'll need all the variables for saving user. So what usually I do is I'll come here and I'll say I'll execute this function like this. So I'll simply say response is equals get this user and execute this method. That is going to be my response, right? So then from the response, now I have all the variables I need. I can just capture the variables here. So I have user ID equals user ID, username is equals username, first name is first name, last name is last name, mobile is mobile, email is email. Do I have anything else? Yeah, for password, they could provide a password, but for the salt, I can do this bin to hex 16 characters. So this is a function inside PHP that allows you to generate a random 16 bits character, but I can actually do maybe say 30 to make it longer. I can do 30 characters. Then I have my salt. So the password will be provided, but the salt will be generated by the user. So once I'm done with that, I could simply come here and I now say echo JSON encode the response, because I know the response is going to be an array. It's either going to return this, return this, return this, or return this. So either way, it's going to return an array, and I need to encode that array to encode that array so that it is now a JSON object. And this is actually our first API endpoint. And now you can actually be able to test it and see how that works out.